Hello everybody, it's time for a new making of. I recently returned from my last photo trip to the incredible world of Denmark. Very simple, very ordinary landscape, and I think it's time for a new making of about a photo I took there, and I found it quite interesting, and it's a bit unusual for photos I usually take, and I think it could be interesting for you to see how I get to the final result of this photo. And Denmark, how can I say it? I think it's easy to get inspired in great landscapes, but it's hard to get a good shot in ordinary landscapes. And I think this is typical for Denmark. Everything is very flat, and it's a very urban landscape, and you have lots of farmlands, and all the sceneries at the seascapes are very, very ordinary. And a great photo in Denmark, I guess, it depends very on the weather conditions, and the landscape can change very, very fast if the weather is right. And because of the far side, there's lots of space to catch this changing weather conditions. And this photo is an example for dealing with this simplicity, and maybe with this ordinary, to find something, and also with struggling and dealing with problems. And I will show you a photo. You can see this here. It's taken by my wife, and with an iPhone. And you can see, if you see, it's me. Obviously, it's me. And maybe if you see this photo, you ask yourself, what the hell is he doing in this greenish gross mud in front of the sea? On the top left, you can see the changing light situation. We stay in the van most of the time during the day because of heavy rain, and the rain stops, and I see on the horizon there on the left the clearing up of the sky. And I know as a landscape photographer, this changing weather conditions are always good for great photos. And I know since my photo trip on Iceland, where you have lots of dark volcano beaches, that green and black is working very well. And now we have to talk about vision. And this is always complicated if you talk about vision, talking about a photo. It ruins everything. So, but for explaining how I make decisions on this photo, it's important to talk about this. So this blackness and this green tones are something like death and life, very, very near together. And it's something like antagonists that are working together. It's something like poles in life. And so I think this fits perfectly together. And seeing this algae in the foreground and the light in the sky from the clearing up of the sky, this could work well together for photo, for vision. But maybe not too much talking about vision at the moment. Maybe we can start talking about the technical facts that are behind the decision of making this photo. Of course, I As you can see here in the photo, I use my 24mm lens 1.4 from Canon. I'm working with a 5D Mark II. And in front of the camera you see obviously an ND graduated filter, two-stop hard from Stingray. I love the filter from Stingray. They are working perfectly for me in certain conditions. And what you're not seeing in front of the lens is the polarization filter that helps me making visual expressions in the foreground of the photo. And maybe it's a good time to switch to the photo. And you can see here now in Lightroom, this was the shot I have done, and it is obviously, compared to the photo taken with the automatic exposure of the camera of the iPhone, it is darker, and the reason why is I underexposed this photo. Of course, I underexposed this photo to work out the darker tones of this photo. I keep an eye on the foreground to have a good exposure, especially for the foreground. Underexposure means that it's hard to get more shutter speed, and I like it if the shutter speed is above 1 second at least on seascapes, because it's flattened and smooth the water, the surface of the water. So I work on f/22 on the 24mm lens from Canon 1.4, and it's good to have this lens, and it's not always a sign of quality if you have a lens that has a wide, or is able to open wide in terms of aperture. It's more important in terms of landscape photography to gain time for the exposure. And so I work with f/22 on this lens, and I like working with f/22 because there's also there's still a high quality for this photo, and I often use ISO 50 also on this image to gain stop in terms of exposure. So I come with all the filters in front of me to shutter speed of 1.6 second, which is quite enough for this photo. Talking about filters, you see the filter effects of the neutral density gradiated filter from Stingray two-stop hard. I told you before on the sky. It's quite dark, and there's this light, this clearing up of the sky in the background, which I'm heading forward using the two-stop hard filter. And as you can see in front of the photo here, there's some structure you can see below the surface that was pronounced by using the pull filter. Talking about filter, there was a second exposure I took in which I tried to capture more softness on the surface of the water. I show you the photo here. It's also the final retouched photo, and as you can see, this photo has a smooth surface of the water, but it also have this bluish tones in it, and this is the reason why you should not use a big stopper from Lee, although it's a great neutral density filter which gives you 9 or 10 stops in terms of exposure. So this was not the final image I was heading forward, because the blue tones ruins all things about the vision I was telling you before. But coming to the final photo, I show you the final photo and the final retouched photo in Lightroom. As you can see, this is the final result of retouching the photo, and compared to the beginning, you can see there's lots of retouching in it, and this is not typical for me. Normally I try to do the best in the camera, and I'm not a big fan of retouching too much. So how does it come from this photo to this photo? Of course, it's done in Lightroom, and I will try to reconstruct all the decisions I've made to gain this final photo. Okay, let us come to some basic retouching. Even though this photo is obviously very dark and a bit underexposed, it's not dark enough for me. So I underexpose the photo till the foreground becomes a little bit too dark, or maybe not too dark. And I also put in the photo some contrast, and this is very important to pronounce the light in the background, the clearing up of the sky. Coming to the fine-tuning of the highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, and I try to darken the photo using the highlights slider here. Try to highlight the foregrounds a bit, and I think the white slider is not best to use at the moment, because it's ruining the nice contrast here in the sky. And I also pull up the black slider here to get more structure and more definition in the foreground. To gain a little bit more structure, I reduce the highlights a bit, and I try to pronounce all these structures here with the clarity slider. I love the clarity slider in terms of landscape photography. And now I think I'll lower the blacks a bit. And of course I use the vibrance slider a bit, not too much. This will saturate especially the greenish tones in the foregrounds. Coming to the curve, the tone curve, I use it to gain more contrast, and I use this little dot here from the tone curve to gain more contrast in the sky, and I try to highlight the highlights even a bit more, and I think this works quite well for me. It also brings out a little bit more structure here in the green tones. Okay, coming to the HSL panel here in Lightroom, you can do great things in terms of color with it. And I previously, or in the first version of this, I retouch the yellow and the greenish tones very much, and I highlight these tones a lot. But I showed the final result of this retouching in in a Google Hangout, and I like getting feedback on Google Hangouts, showing my photo. And two guys told me that there's a conflict between the foreground and the background, and so I reduced these tones a bit, only highlight and saturated a bit the greenish tones of the algae in the foreground. But this photo is not the final result, as you can see. There's another thing that pronounces. You see the foreground. It's quite similar at the moment, I think, and looking at this retouched version, I think everything that is in the upper half of the photo is quite too bright, and this is something, if I would have known this in the field, I would have put in a second neutral density gradiative filter in front of it and maybe pull it down to this line, but it's not possible to visualize any effect of the retouching process. Lucky Lightroom has the ability to get a gradiative filter for the retouching in the raw format, and I will use this filter on this photo, and I use this especially to darken the sky. I will open up the width of this area of effect here. So I darken the photo a bit, I put a bit more contrast in it, and of course clarity helps, and I will give some saturation in it, especially to saturate the reddish tones. The red tone is complementary to the green tone in terms of color theory, which also pronounce these antagonists of life and death in this photo. But not talking too much about vision, I told you before. And I will do some fine-tuning here, and I think I will darken the photo quite a bit. This is quite working well at the moment. The next step for retouching this photo will be a vignette. I often use vignettes in landscape photography. When I try to put on a vignette here, you see two things that are not working so well. The vignette is darkening this part of the highlight of the sky, and this is not working so well because there's not very much of this reddish tones in the sky. So I don't think that it is a good decision to even darken this part of the sky there. The vignette is also darkening the foreground, and I think this is also not a very good thing. So I'm not using the vignetting panel here in this photo. I double click on Amount, so I got the original version. So I'm coming to the adjustment brush, which helps me to darken. I lower the exposure here, which helps me, and I try to switch off auto mask, and I think 30% density of this adjustment brush is a good decision. So I try to draw in the vignette with the adjustment brush. I cannot do it so precise in this tutorial, but you can see I can avoid this area which I don't want to have darkened in, and I try to darken only a little bit of the foreground here, and also reduce the density for the border here of this, and to try to make it more even. And what I do also is I try to darken this part of the sea to get another thing that is important for me. I want to have a relation from the background to the foreground, and there's something like this diagonal light beam, or maybe maybe this relation in terms of light between these two objects. And I also try to pronounce this with the adjustment brush by highlighting or by dodging this area a bit. So working with the adjustment brush is very time consuming, and I think it's not a good idea to adjust this photo to the final result here. And I also make a little bit adjustment in the sky, especially to I will show you here to colorize this reddish tones here. I use the auto mask tool to affect this reddish tones here, and you can see it's working quite well. It's also highlighting the sky here, and I can do this also a little bit here on the right side. And when you press the O key, you see that it affects most of the time of the highlight areas here. It's not so very precise now, but you can see what it's doing now. The main goal of this making of was not to produce an exact copy of the original retouched version of this photo. This making of is more about how I make decisions for this retouching, and I think it is more important to learn something about this decision making, to implement it to your own style of retouching. So it's not always about values and sliders you can manipulate. It's more about thinking, it's about feeling and getting a vision that is expressed by the final photo. And as you can see, it's a little bit different from my original retouch version, and I think it's a question about fine-tuning with the adjustment brush at the moment. So this making of is coming to an end. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial about strategies in making a photo. And if you like this little tutorial, please write down something in the comments, or write me an email, or look at my blog. And of course, please reshare this video. You can find more videos on YouTube, and some of them are in German language because I am from Germany, but some of them are also in English language. So feel welcome and have a look at all my work there on the YouTube channel, or follow my blog, or follow me on Google+. I need followers on Google+, but I need more followers on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. I often tweet in English language, so feel welcome and follow me also on Twitter. Your comments are making these tutorials better, and also are your comments very important for me personal, because I'm growing from feedback. And this is all about sharing informations. And maybe we will see us again one day in real life, or maybe somewhere on the web, which is quite obviously more possible. And until then, have a nice time. See you. This was Olaf Bathke from Germany. Have a nice time. Bye bye.